So we're going to be looking back at the Tobias Harris trade because many people thought that if the Clippers don't trade Tobias Harris, they don't get Kawhi nor Paul George. So let's talk about it. Was there a clear winner in this trade? Let's look at both teams and how it benefited their franchise. So Tobias Harris last year had probably one of the best seasons of his career, if not the best season of his career. And he was traded to Philadelphia because they needed a scorer to pair with Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid. They thought Tobias would fill that void being at the 4. And it was an okay trade. They ended up being the 3rd seed again, as well as making it to the 2nd round, and was one Kawhi buzzer beater away from being in the conference finals, and hell, even being in the NBA finals. Fast forward to the offseason, Elton Brand, the GM for the 76ers, decided to spend nearly $300 million on Tobias Harris. They paid him $180 million, and then they gave $109 million to Al goddamn Horford.
On paper, this team was supposed to be championship level contenders. Obviously, you have Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid as the superstars, and then you have Tobias Harris, and then Al Horford, who's a pretty solid veteran, and then you have a young 3-and-D guy in Josh Richardson. A lot of people thought this team was worthy of winning a championship, and then they underperformed in the regular season, meaning they were so good at home, but they were pretty much a G League team on the road. And they got bounced in the first round by the Boston Celtics. Obviously, Ben Simmons not being there played a factor on why they lost. But still, the fact that the Sixers were the 6th seed and not only performed horrible on the road, they didn't perform that well in the playoffs despite Joel Embiid averaging 30 a game. And it's very disappointing to see a team that was supposed to be a championship level contender perform like that. But of course, we're talking about the Tobias Harris trade, so I'm not going to focus too much on the 76ers. Rather, we're focusing on a trade that was supposed to put Philadelphia over the top of teams like the Boston Celtics, the Toronto Raptors, and the Milwaukee Bucks. During the 2019 offseason, despite having a career year with the Clippers before trading him, the 76ers offered him 5 years and $180 million, just like I showed you in that photo from Clutch Points. But he is getting paid that money after underperforming in the playoffs. Well, not even underperforming. He only averaged 15.5 a game. And if y'all look at his stats right here, and I'm going back to 2015-16 to where he spent his first half season with Detroit, I want to ask y'all, does that scream 5 years and $180 million to you? Because it sure as hell doesn't to me. It screams more like, 70-80 million, which is what the Clippers originally offered him, but he refused it, which I kind of guess that is a factor of Tobias getting traded. Now, I'm not saying he should not have taken the contract. I would have accepted the $180 million offer if I was a Tobias Harris over $80 million, but that's still a lot of money. So I'm going to get the bag type guy, but if y'all look at it, he only averaged almost 20 points a game, which, to be fair, it's pretty good, I guess. It's pretty solid, but again, it doesn't scream $180 million to me. So in hindsight, I think they were expecting, or at least Elton Brand and Brett Brown expected Tobias to be a 21 plus point per game score. I don't know, but of course I'm talking about whether the trade was right for the 76ers and does Tobias really fit with the team. Now, of course, I don't think at this point that the trade was really worth it for the Sixers. Number one, because he doesn't fit Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid and what the offense requires of them. Because if you look at the 2018 roster, they had JJ Redick, Robert Covington, and Dario Saric, all of them who were great floor spacers. Tobias is a great floor spacer, but he needs the ball in his hands in order to make that play. If you need him to score, he's going to have the ball in his hands. It was not the case for Redick, Covington, and Saric. So the fact that we know Ben Simmons is not capable of moving without the ball unless if it's for cutting and dunking, and Joel Embiid is really not all that effective without the ball either. Giving the ball to Tobias Harris to make plays like we did with the Clippers, it does take away touches for Simmons and Embiid. Now, I'm not saying Tobias cannot move without the ball. There were plenty of plays I watched through his full season with the Clippers before he got traded and with Philadelphia when he got traded. And Tobias has shown that he's capable moving without the ball, but the problem is he's just not that type of player. He doesn't overall fit Philly's system with Simmons and Embiid. The only players I've seen ever since trading Covington, Saric, and letting JJ Redick go, the only two players I see that actually fit Philly's system are Mike Scott and Glenn Robinson III. By the way, I also forgot to mention Landry Shamet. But for Tobias to be effective on this Sixers team, again, you need to surround him with shooters. Keeping Mike Scott would be a good option, and they could have kept Redick, Saric, and Robert Covington, and of course, as I said, Landry Shamet. That is one of the only ways Tobias will be effective in this offense, but it's just not with this roster. So at the time, did I think the 76ers made a good trade for Tobias Harris? Yeah, I thought they were a championship contender, as many other people thought they were championship contenders, because we had Simmons, Embiid, and of course Jimmy Butler at the time. But something tells me, though, that I believe the Sixers could have traded for Danilo Gallinari instead of Tobias Harris. Like, okay, do that same trade with Mike Scott, Boban, and I think it was some second-round picks. I gotta look up that trade. But I would have rather preferred Danilo Gallinari over Tobias Harris, because even though Gallo is probably the same volume scorer that Harris is, I think Tobias is better in terms of points per game. I think Gallo is a better fit for this offense than Tobias because of the fact that Gallinari does not need the ball in his hands to score that much, and he is a better off-ball shooter than Tobias, in my opinion. But just looking at it right now, I think the Sixers really took the biggest L in this trade. Now, they got Doc Rivers, and I just hope things improve their situation, but overall, this trade went from a A- to a D+, all within a year. Now, that's enough about the Philadelphia 76ers and how they lost the Tobias Harris trade. Let's talk about the LA Clippers, because I don't necessarily think they won this trade either. Obviously, looking at the title with the "Is there a winner" part, y'all obviously expected me to say, oh, if there was really a winner in this trade, and that's up for y'all to decide, man. But I personally think that both teams kind of lost this trade. Even though in hindsight, when the Clippers signed Paul George and Kawhi, they were immediate title favorites, and a lot of people, even Stephen A. Smith, said at the time that the Clippers were the obvious winners in this Tobias trade because of the hindsight that if they didn't trade Tobias, they don't get Kawhi, they don't get PG. Now, obviously, at the time that Tobias got traded, Stephen A. Smith said that at the 2019 trade deadline. But it confirmed to a lot of fans, and myself included, not just Clipper fans, but NBA fans, that, hey, this trade might have been worth it for the LA Clippers. And throughout the rest of the regular season after trading Tobias Harris, it looked like it was worth it because a lot of people thought that they were going to get swept by the KD, Boogie, Steph, and Clay-led Golden State Warriors. I personally thought it was going to be a sweep, but surprisingly, they came back down 31 points in Game 2 and then ended up forcing a Game 6 down 3-1 in Game 5, with both those games being on the road. So it looked like it was going to be worth it in the end because you added Kawhi and PG, two of the top two-way players at the time on this roster. This team looked like a better team on paper. And despite what MVPG 13%, oh, my bad, George Paul, oh no, now I know his name, Paul George says this was a championship or bust year. And throughout this regular season, the 2019-2020 regular season, it was worth it. Because in the regular season, they were the second best team in the West, and they were ranked number 5 in defensive rating. However, the points they allowed in terms of ranking, they ranked 13th. So something told me that this Clippers team was going to underperform in the playoffs. And obviously, if y'all have been living under a rock, they did. Even in their Game 6 win against the Dallas Mavericks, they looked like they underperformed. It took a Game 5 to blow them out with 150 points and a good performance by that whole Clipper team in Game 6 to get them past the first round, and an injured Kristaps Porzingis. And obviously, they blew a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets, blowing 3 double-digit leads thanks to Marcus Morris pretty much trying to fight with Paul Millsap. By the way, that Harkless trade was pointless because it was just because Marcus Morris only averaged 19 a game on the Knicks. So, jokes on the Clippers for that trade. And while the Tobias Harris trade proved that if they didn't trade him, they don't get Kawhi, it has a ground in reality. The fact of the matter is, it wasn't like he signed a supermax deal to stay with the LA Clippers. He only came here if and only if Paul George came to LA. And we all know what happened in that very disastrous trade, which looked like the Oklahoma City Thunder were the clear winners of the trade, trading Gallo, my man Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I think it was like 5 first-round draft picks. And that is a problem considering that the Clippers did not win a championship this year. Now the pressure is going to be all on them, on the whole Clippers organization and Kawhi and PG, because if they end up losing, there is a chance that Kawhi leaves and Paul George is out the door, and they basically traded Tobias Harris for nothing, as well as trading SGA, Gallo, and all their first round picks for basically nothing, except for being 1 round better than they were the year before. And for a guy who elects to sit out games when he feels like it, and for another guy that is pretty good in the regular season but chokes harder in the playoffs than Jamal Murray and his girlfriend in that one hotel room, which I'm not going to get into. And from the looks of both teams had reports about them having locker room issues. Obviously, the Clippers having issues with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George getting the preferential treatment, and then a lot of people were shrugging off Paul George after he was trying to motivate the team in the locker room and such. And then for Philadelphia, Al Horford basically said that, hey, we have drama in the locker room, but we're going to keep that private. And he said that in front of the media, which is not a smart thing to do because it sets off a whole crap ton of alarms for this team. Now, as a Laker fan, I'm not a gigantic Clippers hater nor a Sixers hater. This is just me looking at the Tobias Harris trade objectively because of a lot of things that made me feel like the Clippers were the winners of the Tobias Harris trade the whole time, because of the fact that they got both Kawhi and PG. 2 of them had MVP caliber seasons before joining up together to be on the Clippers. And I thought the same way as well, as the Clippers were up 3-1 against Denver in the playoffs. Now, obviously, it's questionable if there is a clear winner of this trade. We're going to have to see next year because, again, both these teams are going to play with chips on their shoulders. They're going to play with something to prove. And if those 2 teams end up falling short and not one of them makes at least the conference finals in their respective conferences, it's safe to say that there is no winner in the Tobias Harris trade. Rather, they both lost. So yeah, that is the Tobias Harris trade and me looking at it objectively. If y'all enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, whatever y'all want to do. I'm going to be uploading on this channel, going to be doing some 2K talks. I'm not going to get 2K21 to next gen because I heard 20 was trash, 18 was trash, and 21 on the 4 was trash. So I'm waiting until next gen to do actual gameplay on NBA 2K21, as well as doing some gameplays on video games like Mortal Kombat and Soul Calibur, and then obviously inspired by Rusty and a Funky Diabetic, and I think Dom2K do 2K talk. So I appreciate it, guys. Thank you all for watching. Deuces.